The Apostle Paul wrote to the Galatians, "Bear one another's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ." Stephen Ministry embodies this call in more than 13,000 congregations all over the world, caring for those going through a challenging time. For a look inside the Stephen Ministry at Fourth Presbyterian Church in Chicago, let's welcome Roger Wilson, who has been a member of Fourth Church for 15 years and served as an elder and deacon. Roger is a Stephen leader and a Stephen minister. We also welcome Kat Evans, a member of Fourth Church who sought care from Stephen Ministry and is here to talk about her experience. Thank you both for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Roger, tell us a little bit about Stephen Ministry and how it got started.
Sure. Stephen Ministry is a one-on-one caring that provides that kind of listening ear without judgment, without trying to provide solutions. As you said, it has been in about 13,000 congregations across the country. It was founded originally by a Lutheran pastor psychologist who realized that he could not provide that kind of support to people for any length of time. So it became a ministry that was populated by members of the congregation.
Stephen Ministry was named after Stephen from Acts in the New Testament of the Bible, who was one of the first deacons chosen when the disciples also realized they couldn't handle all the work that needed to be done. Stephen was elected and ended up being the first martyr, but he was one of the first that served the early Christian church.
Wonderful. So, Kat, you actually sought some counseling through Stephen Ministry. Would you tell us a little bit about your experience?
It was a tough time. I have a family member who deals with mental illness and addiction, and it destroyed my family in a lot of ways. And that person is still alive, and so one way to describe it is that we're all grieving for someone who is still alive. And because it really tore everyone apart, it wasn't like I could go to family members for help. And there was a point at which I thought even my friends were probably sick of me calling and saying, I can't go to this thing, we have this drama going on. It went on for years. And the Stephen Minister was, for me, it helped me reconnect to myself, to my life, it helped root me with a friend who could just listen and help me recenter so I could get back to my life and also serve the family when I could.
So it was a great help for you?
Incredibly.
Incredibly. And Roger, you were saying it's not really counseling.
No.
So what is the process when someone comes to a Stephen minister?
If somebody either self-identifies or if somebody refers them to us, first off, they are actually interviewed to make sure that Stephen Ministry is appropriate for them. We will not deal with somebody who is a drug addict or a recovering alcoholic. We deal with people who have that challenge or crisis in their life. After they have been interviewed, they will be connected with a Stephen minister, and the Stephen minister then reaches out to them as an individual and says, "We've been connected, would you like to meet with me?" And once that first meeting happens, then the anticipation is that they will meet probably once a week for about an hour and just spend time in talking, the Stephen minister doing a lot of the listening. It's sometimes difficult not to relate your own story as the Stephen minister, but we really encourage them to let the care receiver spend most of the time doing the talking.
What are some of the life-changing stories that you've been able to help some people through?
My first care receiver, and this relationship lasted almost 4 years, which is an extremely long time for a Stephen minister relationship, was an individual who was going through a series of situations where his life partner was in both medical and mental issues, being moved out of one caring facility to another, and every time we would get together, it seemed like there was something more that had happened. But he began to refer to me as his therapist, even though that is not a term we use, but the therapy of being together for that hour and allowing him to just talk out those issues just made a huge difference in his life, to where at the end of that 4 years, we could truly say he could handle this now for himself.
And Kat, what was going on through your faith journey when you were going through the Stephen ministry?
I sought it out partially because I knew it was available at my church, which is a place I feel safe and a place that I feel like is the place I can go to fall apart. It is the place where I can be my authentic self. So I knew Stephen Ministry was available, and I also couldn't really afford a therapist. It was a better, more affordable option for someone who is on a lower income scale. And so in that way, it was entirely connected to my faith journey. I knew it was there. I knew it would be there for me, and I knew I would feel safe there. In terms of, did we talk a lot about faith in those meetings? Of course, because we both were comfortable doing so. But I know that people who don't necessarily have a relationship to a God or don't necessarily have a good relationship to a place of worship are also welcome in Stephen Ministry, and they can also feel safe there, even if faith isn't something they want to talk about.
If someone is seeking this kind of guidance, where do they go? How do they get involved in this?
We have a hotline. So they can call, leave a message, and one of our Stephen leaders will get back to them and begin that process of determining if Stephen Ministry is the right thing for them at that time. And I'd like to add something to what Kat was saying about the relationship. Confidentiality is one of the most important aspects of the ministry that we provide. We never talk about the individual by name to anyone else. Even when we meet in peer supervision, we never use the name of the individual we're caring for. We don't, during coffee hour, go up and say, oh, this is my Stephen care receiver, or that we don't acknowledge the fact that that relationship exists.
How can a church get involved if they want to start a Stephen Ministry in their congregation?
The very easiest way is to go to the Stephen Ministry website. It has a very clear set of steps. A church first enrolls as a Stephen Ministry church through the website or through a call to Stephen Ministry in St. Louis. Once they have done that, then they need to identify people as Stephen leaders who really begin to put the program together. And the Stephen leaders go to any one of 3 or 4 locations where they receive training. It's a full week of training. The time I was at St. Louis, there were over 300 people in that group being trained as Stephen leaders. Then they come back to their church and they begin the process of forming a Stephen Ministry at their church.
Kat, what would you say to someone who is facing some kind of challenge in their life, how to approach a Stephen minister, or if they're just feeling like, I don't know if this is right for me? What would you say to them, and how much it's helped you?
I'd always ask them about their own support system and say, do you need another listening ear? Would you like another listening ear? There are, and usually they think you mean therapist, right? And that's a wonderful tool. But it could be, well, for whatever reason, there are people who will just listen to you and form a relationship with you and stay by your side and walk through this journey with you and not try to fix it for you. Those are wonderful things to hear, or at least if they are wonderful things to hear, that person will perk up. If it's not for them, then obviously there's no one ever trying to sell this, right? It's very much we have this here if you would like it.
Right.
Yeah, it's here if you need it.
Yes.
Yeah. And the relationships can dissolve whenever the recipient feels that that's ready. Right? We say, I think this particular relationship or the way in which we relate to each other, I don't think I need this anymore, and you can dissolve that formally.
Well, thank you so much, Roger and Kat, for sharing more about Stephen Ministry. We appreciate you coming on our show.
Delighted to be here.
I'm Anne Marie Gerhardt for Different Drummers and the Greater Chicago Broadcast Ministries. Keep the faith.